Hi everyone. So the object that I was given is called the Vale of York Hoard. So let's get started. Um, so my lecture objectives are 1, to teach others about the Vale of York Hoard, what it is, who found it, where and when it was found, what it contained, who left it there, and how we know who left it there. 2 is to teach others who the Vikings were and why they were important. Were they civilized? Were they savage bad guys? Or could they be considered glitz with violence? And the third one is to explain how the Vale of York Hoard and the Vikings relate to the Silk Road. There was raiding and trading all throughout Europe and beyond. They traded with members of the Abbasid Empire and Byzantium, which was in Constantinople. There was merchants from Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan that traded with the Vikings via Russia and the Baltic. And there was a trade route that stretched from Scunthorpe in England to Samarkand, which is in Uzbekistan. And inside the Vale of York Hoard, there was coins and jewelry from Scandinavia, Russia, and Central Asia. So, the Vale of York Hoard, what is it? When I first saw that this was my object, I had no idea what they were talking about. The only word I was familiar with was hoard, which I knew was a group of something, but I didn't know what a vale was, and I figured York was a place. So when I started reading about it, I found out that a vale is a cup, and it's from York. It was found in York, England, and they call it a hoard because of how many things were stuffed inside this cup. So, what is it? It's a treasure that was stuffed in a Frankish silver cup that was buried. And who found it? A father and son, David and Andrew Whelan, who were out metal detecting in a field. And they'd been to this field before, according to the BBC source, and they hadn't really found much except Victorian age buttons. And so they were really excited when they found this cup stuffed full of all this stuff. And it was found in the winter of 2007, and where it was found was Yorkshire, England, and it contained broken and intact jewelry, silver bars, 617 silver coins that included Islamic coins, one Athelstan coin, which we'll get back to that, a York coin that was minted in 920, and a dirham from Samarkand. So who left it there? They believed, a Viking obviously left it there, but they believe he was a member of York's powerful elite. And he left it there around 927 BC. So that's in the 10th century. So at this time, around 927, it's close to when England became a kingdom and a state. And so Athelstan, which remember one of his coins was found in the cup, he was an Anglo-Saxon king, and he conquered Northumbria, which was a Viking kingdom, and it's where York is located, in 927, and he united those two kingdoms. So he created England as we know it, but he was the first king who could claim to rule over that whole area of what we know as England. And how do we know that this cup, this treasure, belonged to a Viking and not an Anglo-Saxon? And the reason we know is because part of the hoard contained hack silver. And hack silver is silver that has been broken up, hacked apart, and Vikings used it as currency. So that's how we know that this was a Viking cup and a Viking treasure that somebody buried. So, who were the Vikings now? Were they savage bad guys like this very scary looking character here? Or were they more civilized like Hiccup off of How to Train Your Dragon. He's the only civilized type of Viking that I could think of. So, were the Vikings savage bad guys? They had a reputation as being plunderers, warriors, and savages, but they saw themselves as explorers primarily and traders. So, could they be considered civilized? They were traders, merchants, farmers, settlers, and shipbuilders. They set up trading posts throughout the Baltic and established routes on the open sea from Scandinavia to Britain and Ireland. And at the height of the Viking Age, trade routes extended as far west as Greenland, as far north as the White Sea, and as far east as Byzantium and the Volga River. And their primary motive for trading was to obtain silver, because that was their standard medium of exchange. So that was one of the main reasons that they liked to do trade. And York, which is where the Vale was found, was actually an important commercial and manufacturing center. And the Viking rulers there were minting their own coins. And they did this for two reasons. One was propaganda, which we learned in other lectures that coins were kind of a form of mass media. And so they created these coins to let other people know that their kingdom was just as respectable as other Western Christian states. And it's also believed that a coin money economy demonstrated a strong government. So that's one of the reasons they used coins as propaganda. And then the second reason they minted coins was for commerce, of course, which there's such a high volume of coinage that's been found and produced. So it indicates that the Vikings had a high level of transactions. They used these coins a lot. So, do we think they're civilized or are they bad guys? And the answer is they were both. The BBC source, I really like how they called the Vikings glitz with violence. So they were savage warriors that plundered areas. Like, they weren't nice. They did some pretty bad things. But they were also civilized settlers who established communities and governments. And they were described in the BBC source as being aggressive with glamour. So, yeah, they were aggressive, but they were also very much involved in trade and settling down. So trade was really important to them. So my next question is, how does the Vale of York Hoard connect to the Silk Roads? Like, how do the Vikings connect to the Silk Roads? Which, when I first saw this, I was like, I have no idea, because we hadn't talked about Vikings or England. And so I wasn't really sure how this was all going to connect. But then when I started doing research and saw how they were using established trade routes and going into Central Asia, and the coins that were found were from different areas of Central Asia, and they went to Constantinople, so it all started connecting. And one of my favorite quotes that I found from a source, which is in the Encyclopedia of World Trade from Ancient Times to the Present, I found this quote or this passage, and I really liked it because it connected the Silk Roads to the Vikings. And it said, the Vikings were instrumental in unifying several long existing regional trade zones in Western Eurasia by connecting Northern Europe with Byzantium, the Islamic Caliphate, and Central Asia by way of European Russia, thereby creating a cross-continental system that moved northern goods in exchange for silver. So that's how they connected to the Silk Roads, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So, trade was really important to them. And the first thing that stood out to me was Constantinople. And we learned that in the Lou book that Constantinople had emerged as the Mediterranean region's major sponsor of trade in Eastern luxuries. And we also learned that there were regulations for artisan and merchant guilds in Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. And so the Vikings they all connected to that. because the Vikings traded their Baltic amber and Russian slaves in Constantinople for silk and spices. So they were in Constantinople. And the next thing is the sea routes south of Eurasia gradually replaced land routes as the main commercial artery of trade by the 10th century. And that's also from the Lou book in the introduction. And so the 10th century is when this Vale was buried. And so these routes had been replaced. And it says in one of my sources that in the 9th century, the Vikings established a trade route linking the Black Sea with Scandinavia, and that Viking raiders and traders used vast networks of rivers to carry out commerce in European Russia. So they were using these same routes. And another thing I found is that Vikings settled where they traded. So in the Lou book, it tells us that agricultural developments from East Asia to Western Europe created wealthy societies, and this made more surplus for trade. So the Vikings were involved in all of that. And then, if you'll remember in our lecture from Professor Hawkley, lecture number 6, when it's talking about from the 8th to the 13th centuries, we learned that Turkish slaves overthrew the Abbasid Empire, and they took control. And they helped keep the Silk Road strong, more efficient, and they had more traffic flowing during this time. And these same routes that they were keeping going, like that they were strengthening, these were routes that the Vikings used for trade with Central Asia. And then the Islamic Caliphate, which had its capital in Baghdad, there was merchants from Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan that would go through there, and they would trade with the Vikings in Europe via Russia and the Baltic. And then there was a huge trade route from Scunthorpe, which is the region of Yorkshire, England, which is where the Vale was found, to Samarkand, which is in Uzbekistan. And there was a coin found in the Vale, which was a dirham that was minted in Samarkand. And these dirhams were minted by the Muslim Caliphate. And then there was also Vikings brought back silver and spices from Arabia, brocades from Byzantine, so silks and fabrics from the Byzantines, and ornamented leatherwork from Persia. So there's evidence that they had all that kind of stuff. And then from Kiev and Russia, the Vikings kept trade open with the Mediterranean route when the Mediterranean routes were closed or unsafe. So they used an alternate route, like through the rivers, and a different route up through Russia when they considered the Mediterranean routes unsafe. And then in the Vale of York hoard, there was coins and jewelry that were contained in that, and they were from Scandinavia, Russia, and Central Asia. So it all connects, like they just all connected, which was kind of cool. So, in conclusion, the Vale of York hoard was buried in the 10th century, and it contained coins minted throughout the region that stretched from England to Central Asia. And it also contained jewelry, silver bars, and hack silver. The Vikings were civilized and uncivilized. They were traders and raiders. And the Vikings used established Silk Road and sea trade routes to move northern goods in exchange for silver and other trade goods from Scunthorpe, England, to Samarkand, Uzbekistan. So that's it. I learned a lot from this, and it was really interesting delving into the whole Viking age and how they connected to the Silk Roads. Thanks.